After I found out he's getting the death penalty, I went outside and I hugged my friends and I started crying and I was just glad it was over.
I'm seeking the death penalty. It's in my best interest, basically, because it's a comfort. The sooner I can fetch myself a new body and come back again.
Around the world, where justice and punishment are meant to bring closure, some courtroom moments leave us speechless. From Steven Lorenzo's cold-blooded murder to Anthony Garcia's revenge-driven crime, these shocking death penalty cases reveal the darkest sides of humanity, proving that no one escapes the consequences of their actions. Let's begin.
The death penalty and nothing less.
What he did to my son before murdering him should be done to him. Eye for an eye.
Gut wrench.
In 2003, two young men, Jason Galehouse and Michael Wachholz, vanished from Tampa's vibrant community. Their families and friends hoped they would return safely, but those hopes were soon shattered when the truth about their fate was revealed. Jason and Michael were last seen alive in December 2003. Their sudden disappearance alarmed their loved ones, but no one could have imagined the horror they endured. Days later, Michael's body was found in his car in an apartment complex parking lot. Jason, however, was never found. Investigators later learned that he had been dismembered and his remains were discarded in dumpsters, making it impossible to recover his body. As police dug deeper into the case, they uncovered disturbing details. Steven Lorenzo used dating apps and bars to meet his victims, often targeting those who were trusting and unsuspecting. Investigators found unsettling evidence on his computer, along with items in his home that raised serious concerns. Steven Lorenzo and his accomplice, Scott Schweikert, had devised a scheme to manipulate and harm their victims. Their actions left a lasting impact on the lives of many and shocked the entire community.
After Mr. Galehouse was killed, his body was wrapped and put on a trailer in the driveway of Mr. Lorenzo's home.
Scott Schweikert, Lorenzo's accomplice, was a middle-aged man from Illinois who shared Lorenzo's sadistic interests. He later cooperated with investigators, providing detailed accounts of how the two planned and carried out their crimes, with Lorenzo taking the lead. Schweikert's testimony became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, as he described the horrifying events that had taken place. A survivor, Albert Perkins, testified about his harrowing experience with Lorenzo. He recounted waking up restrained and unable to call for help. Despite the fear he endured, Albert bravely took the stand to share his story, shedding light on Lorenzo's harmful actions. His testimony was instrumental in exposing the extent of Lorenzo's cruelty and bringing the truth to light. For nearly 20 years, the victims' families waited for justice. Then, in December 2022, Steven Lorenzo finally admitted to his crimes. At his sentencing hearing, he shocked everyone by welcoming the death penalty.
I'm seeking the death penalty. It's in my best interest, basically, because it's a comfort. The sooner I can fetch myself a new body and come back again.
But the judge, Christopher Sabella, made it clear that his decision had nothing to do with Lorenzo's wishes. "This is the punishment you deserve for these horrific crimes," he declared. Jason Galehouse's mother, Pam Williams, who was battling terminal cancer, confronted Lorenzo in court with raw emotion. "I'm sick to my stomach just having to look at your disgusting face," she told him. Alongside her was Ruth Wachholz, Michael's mother, who had also waited 2 decades for this moment. On February 24, 2023, Steven Lorenzo was sentenced to death. The courtroom was filled with emotions, relief, grief, and a sense of long overdue justice. Judge Sabella acknowledged the victims' families' pain, saying, "The thing that was consistent in their testimony is that they have been waiting 20 years for justice. Today, that long wait ends."
Ti condanno a morte. That translates to, I sentence you, Mr. Lorenzo, to death.
Though nothing can bring back Jason and Michael, their families can finally find some closure, knowing that the men responsible for their suffering will never harm another soul again. Lorenzo's case exposed a predator driven by cruelty. The next case shows that sometimes the most dangerous individuals aren't just killers. They're ideologues willing to take innocent lives for their own twisted beliefs.
After I found out he's getting the death penalty, I went outside and I hugged my friends and I started crying and I was just glad it was over.
On April 13, 2014, a quiet afternoon in Overland Park, Kansas turned into a scene of horror. Frazier Glenn Miller Jr., an 80-year-old man with a long history of controversial beliefs, tragically carried out an attack outside a Jewish community center and a nearby retirement home. His attack left 3 innocent people dead, none of whom were Jewish, despite his hateful intentions. Miller's path to violence started long before that day. Born in 1940, he once served as a U.S. Army veteran. but later in life, he became involved with divisive and controversial organizations. In the 1980s, he established a group called the White Patriot Party, which promoted exclusionary ideas and beliefs. He even sought public office to share his extreme viewpoints. He even ran for public office, hoping to spread his extreme beliefs. However, his activities eventually led to his arrest in 1987, when authorities found a stockpile of illegal weapons and explosives in his possession. He served time in prison, but never let go of his extremist views. By 2014, Miller was in poor health and believed he was dying. Instead of spending his last years peacefully, he planned a deadly attack. On that fateful April day, he drove to the Jewish Community Center and fired shots at people in the parking lot. He then moved to a nearby retirement home, continuing his rampage. His victims, William Morva and his 14-year-old grandson, Reet Underwood, were there for a singing competition. The third victim, Terry Lamano, was visiting her mother. They were Christians, not Jewish, proof that Miller's hatred was as senseless as his crime. After his arrest, Miller showed no guilt and appeared in court in a wheelchair. He shouted hateful slogans and even tried to justify his actions during his trial. The court found him guilty of capital murder and multiple other charges. A Kansas jury sentenced him to death, a punishment he openly accepted, claiming he was proud of what he did and said thank you. Miller remained on death row until May 3, 2021, when he died in prison at the age of 80. Officials stated that his death was due to natural causes. Though his life ended behind bars, the pain he caused to the victims' families remains. The story of Frazier Glenn Miller Jr. is a reminder of the dangers of hate and extremism. Innocent lives were lost because of one man's violent ideology. But in the end, justice prevailed, ensuring that his actions did not go unanswered. Our next case shows that sometimes the motive is even more chilling: senseless cruelty with no reason at all.
His internal life is going to be way worse than whatever he will deal with in this lifetime.
I didn't attend any of the court hearings. I couldn't bear to watch what my grandson endured before he was shot.
On November 11, 2022, 21-year-old Bryce Salter spent his evening at Y Bar and Bistro in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It was supposed to be just another night out, but when the evening came to an end, Bryce never made his way home. Hours passed and his family grew concerned. They didn't know that something terrible had happened outside the bar that night. Based on the information the press could gather, authorities were soon involved, and an investigation began into what had taken place. Bryce Salter was a young man full of life, known for his love of sports and fishing. He had a smile that could light up a room, according to his grandmother, Brenda Miles. But in just moments, his life was stolen by Lange, a man who had spent most of his adult life in and out of prison. Lange had been out of prison for only a few months when he managed to obtain a stolen gun. On that tragic night, he used it to take Bryce's life. The murder was brutal and completely unprovoked. He tragically shot and killed Salter. Surveillance footage revealed that Lange approached his car, where he encountered Salter. An argument ensued, during which Lange pointed a gun at Salter's chest, knocking him to the ground. Salter attempted to defend himself, but Lange fired multiple shots, resulting in Salter's death. Bryce's father, Brandon Salter, and other family members struggled to comprehend how someone could be so cruel. But what made the case even more disturbing was Lange's behavior during the trial.
Say surveillance video shows the two men arguing when Lange took out a gun and knocked Stalter to the ground. Stalter fought back, but then Lange shot him.
Lange showed no shame for what he had done. During his sentencing hearing, he laughed as Bryce's family members delivered emotional victim impact statements. He mocked their pain, slumped in his chair, and smirked while Bryce's younger sister, Reese, spoke about how much her brother meant to her. Even after receiving his sentence, a minimum of 100 years in prison, Lange continued to smile. His attitude throughout the trial shocked not only Bryce's family but also the judge, who called Lange's actions senseless, cowardly, and merciless. Despite Lange's disturbing behavior, justice was served. The court handed him a sentence that ensured he would never walk free again. In addition to the 100-year sentence for second-degree murder, Lange received additional time for weapons charges. As the judge announced the verdict, the Salter family clapped with joy as Lange was sentenced.
70 years to a maximum of 100 years. Thank you.
As bailiffs dragged Lange out of the courtroom for his aggressive outbursts, one of Bryce's family members shouted, "How does it feel to know you're going to die in prison?" It was a powerful moment, one that brought a sense of closure to those who had suffered so much. Bryce's father, Brandon, called his son magic and said he had the perfect blend of everything: intelligence, kindness, and charm. His loss left a hole in their hearts that could never be filled. Bryce's sister Reese found the trial to be one of the hardest experiences of her life. Hearing the details of her brother's final moments was devastating, but seeing Lange mock their pain was even worse. In the end, the Stalker family found some comfort in knowing that Lange would never harm another person again. While their pain will never fully fade, they could finally say that justice had been served for Bryce. Lange's lack of remorse was gut-wrenching, but what if a killer not only showed no regret but actively mocked the justice system? That's exactly what happened in our next case.
I didn't kill anyone. I'm not spending the rest of my life in prison for something I didn't do.
In 2007, the quiet town of Elyria, Ohio was shattered by a crime that no one saw coming. Dave Kowalczyk, the well-loved owner of Granny D's Pizza, was found murdered, a brutal and calculated act that sent shockwaves through the community. However, the true horror wasn't just in the crime itself, it was in the man behind it. Neil Simpson wasn't just a killer, he was cold, unrepentant, and dangerous. It started when Dave Kowalczyk's body was found in the pizza shop's back room, his hands tied behind his back. Police discovered security footage showing Simpson entering the shop that night. Investigators tracked Simpson to a nearby motel, where he was arrested within 48 hours. As the trial began, his chilling lack of remorse became clear. He didn't just deny his actions, he mocked the very system trying to bring him to justice. Spitting on jurors, hurling profanities, and showing no sign of regret, Simpson proved one thing: he wasn't sorry, and he never would be. From the beginning, the prosecution painted Simpson as a dangerous man. He had a history of trouble, a personality disorder, and a reputation for making reckless decisions. On the night of the murder, he was the leader of the group, the one in control. It was his plan, his decisions, and ultimately his actions that led to Kowalczyk's mourning death. The prosecution argued that the crime was deliberate, not impulsive. Simpson's past made him a threat to society, and they pushed for the death penalty. The defense, however, tried to shift the focus. They claimed his troubled childhood played a role in his actions. They argued that his upbringing shaped him into the man he became, and that should be considered in his sentencing. As the jury delivered their verdict, Simpson's face twisted with rage. Overcome with fury, he did the unthinkable. He spat at the jurors. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as officers swiftly escorted him out. His lawyers, scrambling to salvage the situation, pleaded for a mistrial, but the judge stood firm. 2 hours later, Simpson returned, his demeanor calmer, but his anger still simmering beneath the surface. He turned to the judge and offered an apology, but not to the jury. "I'm not mad at you," he admitted, his voice steady. "I'm mad at them." The courtroom was thick with tension as the jury left to deliberate. When Neil was seeking the death penalty for himself, hours passed, each minute stretching endlessly for Dave Kowalczyk's family. Would they choose the ultimate punishment? Would Neil Simpson be sent to death row for his brutal crime? After 4 agonizing hours, the jury returned. The room fell silent as Judge Mark Betleski prepared to read the verdict. Kowalczyk's family held their breath. Simpson, appearing through a grainy video feed from jail, sat motionless. His freshly shaven head and cold expression betrayed nothing. Then, the words came. Life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Due to election by the state of Ohio, on count 2, life in prison without the possibility of parole.
This was justice, but it would never bring Dave back. However, Simpson didn't flinch. No reaction, no shame, just the same blank stare, as if he had already resigned himself to his fate. A life behind bars, with nothing but time to think about the choices that led him there. Though he avoided the death penalty, his defense attorney believed the outcome was worse for him. Life in prison meant no second chances, no hope for freedom. While a death sentence would have given him years of appeals, this verdict left him with only one. His fight for freedom was effectively over. The prosecution stood by the jury's decision, calling it fair and just. The case was closed, and the community could finally move forward. This case is heartbreaking in many ways. A hardworking man lost his life over a senseless crime, leaving his family and loved ones in grief. The trial itself was difficult to watch, especially given Simpson's lack of repentance. While the justice system ensured he would never harm another person again, no sentence could truly make up for the loss of Dave Kowalczyk. His family will carry that pain forever. Neil Simpson may have escaped death row, but he'll spend the rest of his days behind bars, alone with nothing but time to think about what he's done. The next case reveals how a man who was supposed to save lives turned into a cold-blooded murderer.
Meditated if there are any number of cases in which a defendant was sentenced to death in Nebraska where the prior conduct did not rise to the level of disregard this defendant has for the value of the life of another human being.
Anthony Garcia was once a promising medical student, but his career took a dark turn. Instead of saving lives, he ended up taking them. Between 2008 and 2013, he committed 2 separate double murders in Omaha, Nebraska. His victims were connected to his past failures, and his crimes shocked the community. Garcia had a troubling history in the medical field. After earning his degree, he struggled through multiple residencies, often being forced out due to unprofessional behavior. His time at Creighton University Medical Center was particularly disastrous. His professors found him arrogant and irresponsible, and he was eventually dismissed. Dr. William Hunter and Dr. Roger Brumbach, two senior figures at Creighton, played key roles in his termination. Years later, Garcia still held a grudge. Unable to build a successful medical career, he blamed those who had dismissed him. Then, in 2008, an unimaginable tragedy struck. On March 13, 2008, Dr. William Hunter returned home to find a horrifying scene. His 11-year-old son, Thomas Hunter, and the family's housekeeper, Shirley Sherman, had been brutally stabbed to death. The attack shook the community, but investigators struggled to find a suspect. Witnesses had seen a heavy-set man in a silver Honda near the home, but the case quickly went cold. For 5 years, the families had no answers. Then, in 2013, the killer struck again. On May 14, 2013, Dr. Roger and Mary Brumbach were found murdered in their home. Roger had been shot multiple times and stabbed, while Mary had been stabbed to death. Once again, knives from the victim's kitchen had been used. Investigators immediately noticed the similarities to the 2008 murders. Their suspicions grew stronger when they discovered an attempted break-in at the home of Dr. Chanda Butra, another former Creighton professor who had classed with Garcia. It became clear that the killer was targeting former colleagues. Detectives began digging deeper into Garcia's background. They discovered that just before the Brumbach's murders, he had purchased a firearm matching the type used in the crime. His credit card records placed him near the crime scene, and his phone had been used to search for the Brumbach address. On July 15, 2013, authorities arrested Garcia while he was driving in Illinois. He was heavily intoxicated, and inside his car, police found a handgun. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder.
Finally, in the fall of 2016, a trial. After 16 days of testimony, a jury found Garcia guilty of all 4 murders.
Garcia's trial began in October 2016. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including DNA, surveillance footage, and even a chilling confession to an acquaintance where he bragged about killing a young boy and an older woman. Garcia showed little emotion throughout the trial, often wearing headphones and appearing uninterested. After weeks of testimony, the jury found him guilty on all counts. In September 2018, a panel of judges sentenced him to death.
Asleep or catatonic. That's how the attorney for revenge killer Anthony Garcia, eyes closed, hands cuffed. He had no reaction, barely any movement during the testimony.
He remained silent and even slept when the judge announced his death penalty. His crimes had been calculated, brutal, and fueled by revenge. The case of Anthony Garcia is a chilling reminder of how bitterness and resentment can turn deadly. Instead of moving on from his failures, he chose to take innocent lives. His victims were people who had once been part of his world, yet he saw them as obstacles rather than human beings. For the families of Thomas Hunter, Shirley Sherman, Roger Brumbach, and Mary Brumbach, justice was served, but their pain remains. No sentence can bring back their loved ones, but at least the man responsible can never harm anyone again.
However, this morning at approximately 7 a.m., Deputy Sutphin encountered Morva on the Huckleberry Trail and was fatally shot.
William Morva was no stranger to trouble, but when he walked into a Virginia courtroom, few could predict how far his desperation would take him, or the chilling aftermath of his actions. 2 lives were lost, and the chain of events he set in motion would leave the nation divided. But it wasn't just his crimes that shocked everyone. It was what he believed and how it shaped his final moments. It all started with what seemed like a routine day in Blacksburg, Virginia. Morva, already in jail for attempted robbery, claimed he had a medical emergency. Authorities escorted him to the hospital, unaware they were walking into a nightmare. What happened next was the scene out of a thriller. Morva overpowered a deputy, snatched his weapon, and made his escape. But this wasn't just a run for freedom. It was deadly. A single shot ended the life of hospital security guard Derek McFarland, sending shockwaves through the town.
Derek McFarland lost his life this morning trying to prevent the escape of Montgomery County Jail inmate William Charles Morva.
With 1 life already taken, Morva was on the run and the community was paralyzed with fear. It wasn't over. Just hours later, another tragedy unfolded. Deputy Eric Sutphin, who joined the manhunt, was shot and killed. The chaos left everyone wondering, how far would Morva go to stay free? The manhunt for Morva lasted 36 hours, gripping the entire state. Armed officers scoured the woods, searching for a man who had proven he'd do anything to avoid capture. When they finally cornered him, Morva surrendered without a fight. But what followed wasn't relief. It was confusion. During his trial, Morva's strange behavior became impossible to ignore. He claimed to be the victim of a vast conspiracy and seemed convinced that his crimes were part of some twisted plan to expose the truth. Prosecutors painted him as cold and calculated, but Morva's defense argued otherwise. They claimed he suffered from severe delusions that warped his sense of reality, making him unable to comprehend his actions. The jury wasn't buying it. In 2008, they sentenced William Morva to death for the murders of McFarland and Sutphin. But the story didn't end there. It was only the beginning. As his execution date approached, Morva's case became a battleground for debate. Human rights activists argued that his mental illness made him unfit for execution. Even some of the victims' families questioned whether this was justice. But the state of Virginia stood firm. On July 6, 2017, William Morva was executed by lethal injection. Until the very end, he held on to his delusions, leaving a final impression that was as unsettling as the crimes he committed. In the courtroom, Morva's detached demeanor unnerved everyone. He sat still, seemingly unaffected as testimonies detailed the pain he caused. For some, his execution was a long-awaited form of justice. For others, it was a grim reminder of the complexities surrounding mental illness in the justice system. Derek McFarland's mother voiced her opposition to the death penalty, saying it brought her no peace. Meanwhile, the family of Deputy Sutphin expressed relief, calling the execution a necessary step towards closure.
The outburst from the wife of one of his victims who shouted that Morva showed no mercy when killing her husband.
The case left a scar on Virginia and reignited debates about mental health and the death penalty. Breaking news! Evil Lives Here now has merch. Support the channel and grab your gear today. Check the link in the description. William Morva's crimes left a trail of heartbreak and sparked heated debates about justice and mental illness. But the next case of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev takes us to a different kind of terror.
72 hours before the bombs detonated, almost to the minute, suspects Tamerlan and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev worked out together at a gym in Boston.
The footage shows Dzhokhar wearing a white baseball cap, walking with his older brother Tamerlan, the alleged mastermind behind the tragedy that killed 3 and left hundreds injured.
On April 15, 2013, a bright spring afternoon in Boston turned into a living nightmare. Thousands of spectators gathered at the finish line of the Boston Marathon, cheering on runners from around the world. But hidden among the crowd were 2 brothers with a plan to turn joy into chaos and carnage. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, just 19 years old at the time, and his older brother Tamerlan carried out one of the most devastating attacks in U.S. history. What followed was a city brought to its knees, a desperate manhunt, and a trial that exposed chilling details about the youngest of the 2 attackers.
Dzhokhar and Tamerlan Tsarnaev can be seen wearing backpacks. As Tamerlan Tsarnaev continued onto the finish line, his younger brother stopped and appeared to set down his backpack just feet away from the youngest victim, 8-year-old Martin Richard.
The attack was carefully planned. Using instructions found online, the brothers built 2 pressure cooker bombs filled with nails, BBs, and other shrapnel designed to tear through flesh and cause maximum devastation. They planted the bombs in backpacks, carrying them to the crowded finish line.
Records show he spoke to Tamerlan Tsarnaev for 19 seconds. Just after the phone call ended, the first bomb went off.
At 2:49 p.m., the first bomb exploded. The blast sent a shockwave of panic through the crowd. Just 13 seconds later, a second explosion erupted, throwing spectators and runners into complete disarray. The damage was horrifying. 3 people were killed, including 8-year-old Martin Richard, who had been standing with his family. 2 young women, Crystal Campbell and Lingzi Liu, also lost their lives. Over 260 others were injured, many of them losing limbs or facing lifelong physical and emotional scars. The brothers melted into the chaos, blending in as if they were ordinary bystanders. For days, the city of Boston was on edge, desperate for answers. When surveillance footage revealed images of the suspects, a citywide manhunt began. On April 18th, the brothers struck again. They ambushed MIT police officer Sean Collier, shooting him in an attempt to steal his service weapon. The plan failed, but the officer lost his life, a senseless act that further enraged the city. Hours later, the brothers were cornered in Watertown, a suburb of Boston. What followed was a violent firefight. The brothers threw homemade explosives at officers and exchanged gunfire in the streets. Tamerlan was ultimately subdued from multiple gunshot wounds and taken down by a brave police officer. Dzhokhar fled, injured and desperate. His hiding place? A dry-docked boat in a nearby backyard. There, he scrawled a chilling message on the walls, justifying the attack as retaliation for U.S. actions in the Middle East. After a tense standoff, law enforcement captured him, ending a dramatic 4-day manhunt. Dzhokhar's trial began in 2015 and was one of the most highly publicized in recent memory. Prosecutors argued that he wasn't just following his brother's lead, but was a willing and active participant. Evidence showed that he helped build the bombs, planted one himself, and showed no remorse. The defense painted a different picture. a young man manipulated by an overbearing older brother. But the evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage showed Dzhokhar calmly walking away from the bomb site, even stopping to buy snacks at a convenience store as victims lay dying. The prosecution presented heartbreaking testimony, including images of the victims and footage of the explosions. Many in the gallery wept openly. After 14 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted Dzhokhar on all 30 charges, including using weapons of mass destruction. The sentence, death.
The Boston Marathon bomber was sentenced to death today. 21-year-old Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was convicted by a federal jury last month of the April 2013 bombings.
Dzhokhar's reaction to the death sentence was chilling. As the verdict was read, he sat expressionless, his demeanor cold and detached. Survivors and families of the victims were stunned by his lack of remorse. Some hoped the sentence would bring closure, while others felt conflicted, knowing that nothing could undo the pain he caused.
When those bombs went off, and I remember the vile, disgusting thing that this person did, and his brother, and they destroyed countless innocent lives.
For Boston, the scars from the attack run deep. The bombing wasn't just a physical attack, it was an assault on the spirit of a city. Yet, Boston responded with resilience, adopting the rallying cry, "Boston Strong," as a symbol of unity and strength. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev remains on death row, his case continuing to provoke debates about justice, punishment, and the true cost of terrorism. Next, we dive into Scott Dozier's case, where his final wishes defied all expectations.
You're going to be dead in 2 days.
Yeah, I am.
Have you processed that?
I mean, as much as a person can, right? That's a heavy-duty thing, isn't it?
Scott Dozier's name became infamous, not just for the gruesome murders he committed, but for his unrelenting demand to be executed. Where most death row inmates fight tooth and nail to delay their sentence, Dozier made it clear he had no intention of waiting. But behind his defiance was a story of betrayal, greed, and violence that left 2 men dead and sparked fierce debates about justice, ethics, and the death penalty itself.
I was a drug manufacturer, I was a drug distributor. I intentionally and willfully engaged in a life outside of the law. All that matters is this is a legally obtained conviction, and I would rather be dead than this any longer.
In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Scott Dozier seemed like an ordinary man chasing success. Born in Boulder City, Nevada, he was described as ambitious and charming. But beneath the surface, he was living a dangerous double life, deeply entrenched in drug trafficking.
Scott Dozier was convicted of murdering 22-year-old Jeremiah Miller in 2002 and robbing him of $12,000 that Miller had brought from Phoenix to Las Vegas to purchase materials to make.
In 2002, his ambition took a deadly turn. Dozier lured Jeremiah Miller, a 22-year-old aspiring dealer, to a Las Vegas motel under the pretense of selling him chemicals to manufacture substances. Miller arrived carrying $12,000 in cash, expecting a quick deal. But instead of delivering on his promise, Dozier murdered Miller in cold blood. What happened next revealed Dozier's calculated nature. To cover his tracks, he dismembered Miller's body, discarding his torso in a suitcase that he dumped in a Las Vegas dumpster. The discovery sent shockwaves through the city. Authorities later learned that Miller wasn't Dozier's only victim. Dozier was also tied to the murder of Jason Green, a 26-year-old associate he buried in the Arizona desert. Investigators determined that Dozier killed Green in a similar fashion, motivated by paranoia and a need to eliminate anyone who might expose his crimes.
If Jeremiah Miller's family really thinks I killed him, they should have the opportunity to kill me.
In 2007, Dozier was convicted of Miller's murder and sentenced to death in Nevada. He was also found guilty of killing Green in Arizona. The evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses, physical evidence, and the gruesome details of the crimes painted Dozier as a man willing to do anything to stay ahead.
Can you help people understand why so badly you want to die?
It isn't that I want to die. It's that I'd rather be dead than do this.
But instead of appealing his death sentence, Dozier made a decision that shocked everyone. He refused to fight, stating publicly that he wanted to be executed as soon as possible. For Dozier, spending decades on death row wasn't an option. "It's not living," he said during a hearing. Nevada, however, was unprepared to fulfill his request. The state struggled to obtain the substances needed for lethal injection, as pharmaceutical companies blocked their use in executions. After years of delays, an execution date was finally set for July 2018. But just hours before Dozier was scheduled to die, a judge halted the process, citing concerns about the untested substance cocktail Nevada planned to use.
Yes, my statement today is that I want to absolutely go through with this on the 14th of November. I would request that we do it without the paralytic.
The delay pushed Dozier to his breaking point. He criticized the system, calling the repeated postponements psychological torture. His case highlighted the growing complications surrounding the death penalty. with many questioning whether the system was truly effective.
The Nevada death row inmate who had been awaiting his execution for over a decade has taken matters into his own hands. Scott Dozier was found dead this afternoon in an apparent suicide.
In January 2019, Dozier's frustration boiled over. Guards at Eli State Prison found him hanging in his cell. He had taken his own life, ending the battle on his terms. For some, his death marked the end of a dark chapter, while others saw it as a failure of justice. Dozier's case didn't just expose the logistical challenges of carrying out the death penalty. It raised deeper questions about the ethics of execution and the treatment of death row inmates. In the courtroom, Scott Dozier's demeanor was unsettling. He showed no remorse for his crimes and appeared unfazed by the death sentence. Families of his victims, including Jeremiah Miller's loved ones, expressed frustration at the repeated delays, feeling they had been denied closure. But Dozier's defiance also sparked debates. Was he a man trying to escape the consequences of his actions, or someone exposing the cracks in a broken system? For those following his case, his death left a mix of relief, confusion, and lingering unease. Scott Dozier's chilling demand for execution exposed cracks in the justice system. Next, we turn to Washington, D.C., where a sniper's reign of terror claimed 10 lives and gripped the nation with fear.
Raj said you will not raise my children on your own. You have become my enemy, and as my enemy, I will kill you. I knew he was going to kill me, and I knew it was going to be a headshot.
In October 2002, Washington, D.C. became a city held hostage by fear. Over the course of 3 terrifying weeks, 10 people were shot and killed in seemingly random attacks. The streets became battlefields, and no one knew who the next victim would be. Behind these calculated killings was John Allen Muhammad, a man whose sniper attacks turned the everyday act of pumping gas or walking to the store into a deadly gamble. But the most chilling part of this story wasn't just the method, it was the twisted motive behind his spree.
William strove to be a dedicated family man. The degree his life would disintegrate would shock everyone who knew him.
John was so charming.
John Allen Muhammad, a Gulf War veteran with a sharp mind and a troubled past, joined forces with 17-year-old Lee Boyd Malvo to execute one of the most terrifying killing sprees in U.S. history. The pair converted a 1990 blue Chevrolet Caprice into a mobile sniper nest, cutting a hole in the trunk to fire shots undetected. The attacks began on October 2, 2002 with the murder of a man in a grocery store parking lot. The next day, 5 more people were killed within hours. Victims were all ages and backgrounds: a landscaper mowing a lawn, a woman reading on a bench, and a man pumping gas. The randomness of the attacks created mass panic. Schools canceled outdoor activities, people zigzagged as they walked to avoid being an easy target, and gas station owners installed tarps to shield customers from potential snipers. But Muhammad and Malvo weren't just killing at random. Investigators later discovered that Muhammad's true motive was personal. He wanted to kill his ex-wife, Mildred Muhammad, and regain custody of their children. The random murders were meant to distract authorities while he carried out his ultimate plan.
What, ma'am?
Oh my God,
Ma'am, listen to me. What is wrong?
A man has been killed in front of me.
How is he being killed in front of you?
For weeks, law enforcement agencies from across the country worked tirelessly to catch the killers. Investigators combed through thousands of tips, piecing together clues from ballistic evidence, crime scenes, and eyewitness accounts. A breakthrough came when Malvo left a fingerprint at a crime scene. This, coupled with the evidence linking the pair to a previous murder in Alabama, helped police identify their vehicle. The blue Chevrolet Caprice was found parked at a rest stop in Maryland on October 24, 2002. Inside the car, police discovered the sniper rifle, maps of the attack locations, and Muhammad's detailed plans. Both men were arrested without incident, bringing an end to the reign of terror that had left the nation shaken. John Allen Muhammad faced trial in Virginia, where prosecutors sought the death penalty. The case was ironclad, with ballistic evidence linking the bullets to the sniper rifle found in the car. Survivors and victims' families filled the courtroom, reliving the horror of those 3 weeks. Muhammad's cold demeanor throughout the trial stood in stark contrast to the emotional testimonies. He showed no remorse, maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. The jury found him guilty of multiple murders and sentenced him to death.
The execution of John Allen Muhammad.
On November 10, 2009, Muhammad was executed by lethal injection. For some, it was the justice they had been waiting for, while for others, the scars of his crimes would never fully heal. The courtroom during John Allen Muhammad's trial was filled with heartbreak, anger, and disbelief. Families of the victims shared stories of lives stolen in the most senseless ways. A father who was the family's rock, a mother who dedicated herself to the community, and a teenager with dreams of changing the world. The randomness of the killings only deepened the pain. Their loved ones were chosen by pure chance, targeted while doing something as ordinary as pumping gas or walking home.
It was hard at first,
just sitting there, being in the same room with these two people that I know took my son's life.
As prosecutors laid out the chilling details of the sniper attacks, the courtroom often glanced at Muhammad. He remained eerily calm, showing no reaction to the evidence or the emotional testimonies. His lack of remorse was unsettling, as though the lives he destroyed were meaningless.
About the people who died?
I do.
LaRufa says fate gave him a chance to survive.
Most of them had zero chance. You know, they were alive 1 minute and dead the next second.
Survivors who narrowly escaped with their lives took the stand, describing the fear that gripped them and the guilt of surviving while others didn't. For them, sitting just feet away from the man who had turned their lives upside down was like reliving the nightmare. When the jury delivered the death sentence, the reactions were mixed. Some families found relief, believing it was the only justice fitting for such a calculated and cruel killer. Others, however, felt the punishment offered little solace, knowing nothing could erase the scars or bring back the loved ones they lost. Beyond the courtroom, Muhammad's crimes left deep scars on the entire D.C. area. For 3 weeks, people lived in constant fear, zigzagging through parking lots, crouching behind cars and avoiding open spaces altogether. Even after Muhammad's execution in 2009, the memories of his killing spree lingered as a dark chapter in American history. John Allen Muhammad's calculated terror paralyzed a city with fear, but the next case reveals 2 killers who turned everyday tools into weapons of unimaginable cruelty.
It was the worst murder case that I ever handled because of the brutality against the 5 teenage victims.
When Lawrence Bittaker's name first made headlines, it wasn't his chilling crimes that grabbed attention. It was the methodical, almost cold-blooded way he approached them. Alongside his partner, Roy Norris, Bittaker became known as one half of the Toolbox Killers, a nickname that would forever haunt anyone who heard it. What they did to their victims was so brutal, even seasoned investigators were left shaken. But it wasn't just the crimes that horrified the world. It was how Bittaker himself reacted to his sentencing. It started in 1979, when Bittaker and Norris began their campaign of terror in Southern California. They weren't random attackers. They stalked their victims carefully, choosing young women between the ages of 13 and 18. The duo used a van they nicknamed the Murder Mac, a seemingly ordinary vehicle, but inside it was equipped with tools meant for unspeakable acts.
The sadistic pair, who used items such as pliers, a sledgehammer, and an ice pick to murder their victims, would become known as the Toolbox Killers.
Over 5 months, Bittaker and Norris abducted at least 5 women. Their method was chillingly calculated. They would lure the victims into the van by offering rides or pretending to need help. Once inside, the victims were bound, gagged, and taken to isolated areas in the San Gabriel Mountains. This wasn't just about murder. Bittaker had a toolbox filled with pliers, screwdrivers, hammers, and other instruments, which he used to inflict torture on the victims. The pair even recorded some of their attacks, creating audio tapes that were later described as the most disturbing evidence ever presented in a courtroom.
When his tape recording of one murder was played in court, people rushed outside and vomited.
One victim, 16-year-old Shirley Ledford, was tortured so brutally that seasoned detectives said they would never forget the sound of the tapes. It was Bittaker's idea to record the crimes, turning the horrific events into something he could relive. The pair's reign of terror came to an end when Roy Norris was arrested for an unrelated crime. Feeling the pressure of the investigation closing in, Norris struck a deal with prosecutors, confessing everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony pointed directly to Lawrence Bittaker as the mastermind behind the murders.
When Norris was arrested, police found in his car pictures of young girls, but much worse was to follow. The arrest of Lawrence Bittaker uncovered a haul of evidence that made obvious the horror of their crimes.
When police searched Bittaker's home, they found shocking evidence, photographs of the victims, personal items belonging to them, and even the van itself, still equipped with its grim contents. In the courtroom, the full extent of Bittaker's crimes was laid bare. The tapes of Shirley Ledford's torture were played for the jury, and the reactions were immediate. Some jurors reportedly broke down in tears, while others had to look away. Bittaker, however, sat stone-faced as if the evidence meant nothing to him. His demeanor throughout the trial was chilling. He didn't flinch, he didn't show remorse, and even seemed to enjoy the attention his crimes were getting. For the families of the victims, it was like staring into the face of evil. In 1981, Bittaker was sentenced to death, with the judge calling him a man who had walked among us but was not one of us. Norris, having cooperated with the prosecution, received a life sentence. Bittaker spent nearly 4 decades on death row in San Quentin State Prison, where he became known for his arrogant attitude and refusal to admit guilt. He even used his time in prison to file appeals and legal challenges, delaying his execution. In 2019, Lawrence Bittaker died of natural causes at the age of 79, avoiding the execution that many felt he deserved. The courtroom during Bittaker's trial was a mix of horror and heartbreak for the victims' families. Hearing the tapes and seeing the photographs was a pain that no one should have to endure. But what made it worse was Bittaker's complete lack of empathy. One of the victim's family members later said that seeing him sit there, calm and detached, was almost as horrifying as the crimes themselves. Even in death, Bittaker left a legacy of fear and sorrow, a reminder of just how dark humanity can become. Now we turn to the case of Angelina Rodriguez, where a shocking act of violence and betrayal will leave you questioning the lengths some will go to. This story is not one to miss.
I didn't poison my husband. I mean, I am willing to take a lie detector test. I did not poison my husband.
On the 9th of September 2000, police turned up at the residence of Frank and Angelina Rodriguez due to an emergency call. 32-year-old Angelina, who received them, then led them to the couple's bedroom, where Frank's lifeless body lay on the floor in a pool of his blood. What the investigation into the incident revealed was the perpetration of a quite horrific set of actions. Jose Francisco Rodriguez had first met his wife Angelina in February 2000 following his first divorce, and very quickly came to call her his soulmate. By April 2000, they were married, with Angelina's 9-year-old daughter, Autumn, joining the family as part of what was her mother's 4th marriage. His new wife, having 3 previous failed marriages, wasn't enough to set any alarm bells ringing for Frank, and his marriage, which he thought would be the beginning of a beautiful life ahead, would end up leading to his horrific death. Only a few months after getting married, Frank found himself hospitalized, and after he was discharged, he thought his wife Angelina was nursing him back to health. However, it appeared that she had been slowly poisoning him with oleander leaf extracts, and then choosing to treat him with Gatorade infused with antifreeze. In between those actions, she had also at least once loosened the natural gas valves in the garage and left to visit a friend. It was obvious that Angelina was repeatedly trying to kill her husband, and he would eventually succumb to the antifreeze-infused Gatorade. The suspected reason behind her actions was that she had taken a sum of $250,000 out of her husband's life insurance only weeks before his death. When the police arrived at the scene of the crime, they were surprised at Angelina's rather calm demeanor after losing her husband. She also contacted the insurance company to inquire about the money only a few minutes after the coroner's investigators left the residence. However, despite the investigators' suspicions, there was no way to immediately conclude that Angelina had a hand in the murder. It would be Angelina herself who would expose herself during interrogations after she mentioned the potential usage of oleander and antifreeze as poisoning agents to authorities.
And the only person that supplied any information that Frank was poisoned was you. No one else knew that Frank was poisoned. Only you.
Despite trying to blame one of Frank's co-workers, there was no doubt in the investigators' minds that Angelina was the main suspect. And in February 2001, she was arrested while hatching another plan to trap their landlord in a legal case for asbestos poisoning. Angelina was convicted of Frank's murder in October 2003. And during her trial, she was also implicated with the murder of her 13-month-old daughter back in 1993, with allegations that she also committed the murder for financial gains. She would, however, deny these allegations.
I broke and made a few terrible, stupid mistakes, which I regret very much. We all make mistakes. I just picked the wrong time to make mine. But murder is not on that list.
Despite denying any wrongdoing in Frank's death, the court sentenced Angelina to death on the 12th of January 2004. The complete absence of any remorse in Angelina's reaction throughout her trial left the court so shocked that the judge stated to the court that he hadn't seen a heart colder than hers for 20 years.
On January 12, 2004, Angelina was convicted and sentenced. She was sentenced to death, not only for the murder of Frank, but also for the calculated way in which she had orchestrated his demise for financial gain.
In November 2010, the California Supreme Court unanimously upheld Angelina's conviction and death sentence. But in November 2024, Angelina, now 56, was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, based on Angelina's claim of ineffective assistance from her attorney. She remains behind bars at Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Angelina Rodriguez's calculated crime showcased a chilling level of manipulation, but the next case delves into an even darker scheme. Brenda Delgado, a woman who orchestrated a shocking murder fueled by jealousy and revenge.
Passion in Dallas. Brenda Delgado, the mastermind in the murder-for-hire plot targeting a Dallas dentist, today convicted of capital murder. Delgado hired a hitman to kill her ex-boyfriend's new love interest, Dr. Kendra Hatcher, in an uptown parking garage.
On the evening of September 2nd, 2015, 35-year-old Kendra Hatcher was shot dead in her parking garage by a suspected robber who fled the scene in a black Cherokee Jeep. The incident was heard by an eyewitness who contacted 911, and the revelations from the case shocked everyone. Hatcher had been dating dermatologist Ricky Paniagua for a few months, and the couple had intentions to get married. However, she was unaware of the obsessive nature of Paniagua's ex, 36-year-old Brenda Delgado, who had been stalking the couple following her own breakup with Ricky a few months earlier. Delgado had been in a nearly 3-year relationship with Paniagua before they split in February 2015, but the pair had remained in platonic contact. However, while Paniagua only had honest intentions, Delgado had been plotting something sinister. An autopsy of Hatcher's murder quickly revealed that her death wasn't a robbery situation gone wrong, but an actual murder attempt. This meant that the list of suspects was quickly narrowed down to one: Brenda Delgado. Delgado had apparently recruited 2 individuals: a 31-year-old local substance dealer named Christopher Love, who was responsible for the shooting, and 23-year-old Crystal Cortez, a single mother who drove the getaway vehicle and bribed them with cash. Delgado had borrowed the getaway vehicle from a friend, Jose Luis Ortiz, who she happened to be with on the evening of Hatcher's murder. After spotting his Jeep on the news, Ortiz contacted investigators to inform them that he loaned it to Delgado, but that she had been with him on the night of the murder.
I gave her a comment like, hey, have you heard about that dentist that got shot in Uptown Dallas? She'd say no. She'd say, well, how funny, because I mean, it looks very similar to mine. I'm over here lending you my car.
When invited for initial questioning, Delgado told the investigators that she had lent the car to Cortez, subsequently resulting in the arrest of Love and Cortez, who both chose to testify against her.
I got $500.
And who paid you?
Brenda did.
Sensing ominous consequences after the apprehension of her hitman, Delgado fled to her native Mexico in hopes to escape justice. However, after being named in the FBI's top 10 list of most wanted female fugitives, with a $100,000 bounty on her head, she accepted extradition to the United States on the basis that she doesn't face the death penalty. After her extradition, Delgado faced trial for her evil actions on the 7th of June 2019, and it didn't take long for the jurors to convict her on charges of capital murder. She was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
You can't even look at me.
Delgado refused to lift her eyes, but was forced to listen as Dr. Hatcher's sister confronted her from the witness stand.
During Delgado's trial, Jennifer Escobar, a former friend and roommate of hers, revealed that she had been obsessed with Paniagua and had long since had plans to execute Hatcher, and possibly even Paniagua himself.
Let's get rid of Kendra Hatcher.
And why did she want to get rid of Kendra Hatcher?
Because she was envious of her.
During her sentencing, Delgado maintained a cold, emotionless look as she was consigned to her fate behind bars.
The jury unanimously finds the defendant guilty of capital murder as charged in the indictment. Thank you, ma'am.
During the victim impact statements, Hatcher's mother, Bonnie Jameson, told Delgado that she had earned her spot behind the cold steel bars for the rest of her life, adding the damning statement, "If justice could have handed you a death sentence, make no mistake, I would have been there front and center."
Have earned your spot on this earth behind cold steel bars for the rest of your miserable, pathetic life.
Today, Delgado is locked up at the maximum security William P. Hobby Unit for Women in unincorporated Falls County, Texas, where she is expected to remain for the rest of her life. As for her murder accomplices, Love is currently on death row for executing the murder, while Cortez was offered a 35-year sentence in exchange for testifying against the other 2. Next, we dive into the case of Nikko Jenkins, whose violent actions left the city of Omaha reeling.
A Class 1C felony, 45 to 50 years to run consecutive to all murder convictions at counts 1, 4, 7, and 10.
On August 11, 2013, the bodies of Juan Uribe Pena and Jorge Caiga Ruiz were found in a pickup truck in Omaha, Nebraska. Based on the information the police gathered, they had been lured to the location with the promise of sexual encounters with 2 women. They were instead shot once in the head with a shotgun and their pockets were emptied. On August 19th, the body of Curtis Bradford was found with a shotgun wound to the back of his head. On August 21st, the body of Andrea Kruger was found with 4 gunshot wounds to her face, neck, and back. At first, it seemed that no one would be caught for these murders, or that these were not murders committed by one person. This was until Nikko Jenkins was arrested for unrelated charges before evidence connected him to the murders of these 4 people. Nikko Jenkins was born into a family that was well known to the police. Jenkins' family members had been arrested on different occasions for crimes ranging from assault to child harm to robbery. When Jenkins was just 7 years old, he brought a loaded handgun to school. When he was 17, he was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 18 years in prison. In 2009, Jenkins was let out of prison to attend his grandmother's funeral. At the ceremony, he attacked the officer supervising him. He was released in 2013 after serving 10 years out of his 18-year sentence. Despite spending most of his teenage and young adult life in prison, he soon committed his worst crimes after he left prison.
We got 2 parties inside the vehicle, appear to be shot in the head. And can you send a squad to our location?
A month after he left prison, the bodies of his first 2 victims were found. His third victim, Curtis Bradford, was someone that Jenkins had met in prison. Information also revealed that he had taken a picture with Bradford a day before his body was found. On August 29, 2013, Jenkins was arrested because he had made terroristic threat charges. It was during the investigation that evidence placed Jenkins close to Kruger's murder location. 3 days after he was arrested, Jenkins confessed to murdering all 4 people. What was bizarre was that he claimed to have sacrificed his victims to Apophis, an ancient Egyptian deity. Despite this, he was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of robbery, 5 counts of use of a deadly weapon to commit a felony, and 6 counts of possession of a deadly weapon.
Is one of the worst killing sprees in the history of this state. Each one of these murders was a deliberate and planned act.
Jenkins scored a 68 on his IQ test, and he was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. Despite this, more doctors said he was faking psychotic symptoms and was eventually judged capable of receiving punishment. So, in May 2017, Jenkins was given 4 death sentences and 450 years in prison.
Soviet resurrection. Russia, get Kennedy.
In court, Jenkins displayed many bizarre actions, including speaking in tongues and laughing. During his sentencing, he showed pretty much no reaction and just looked on behind sunglasses. He appeared with multiple tattoos and mutilations on his face, tongue, body, and pubic area. While he was awaiting his sentence, he tried to commit suicide more than 10 times. Next, we move to the infamous case of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, whose reign of terror in California left a trail of fear and death.
And delivered to the warden of the state penitentiary in San Quentin, California, within 10 days from the date hereof, in the usual course of his duties.
From April 1984 to August 1985, the Night Stalker terrorized the San Francisco Bay Area, murdering at least 14 people during that period. This killer was Richard Ramirez. He had a horrible childhood and suffered constant mistreatment from his father. He developed brain damage and started using substances at age 10. He soon became fascinated with killing after he saw his cousin, who was a war veteran, kill his wife in front of him. When Ramirez moved to the Bay Area, he would often break into homes and steal to support his substance addiction. He soon began to commit more horrific crimes. On April 10, 1984, Ramirez murdered 9-year-old Mei Leung in the basement of his apartment building. He beat, strangled, and the little girl before stabbing her to death. He then hung her body from a pipe by her blouse. This was the beginning of many murders. Between June 1984 and August 1985, Ramirez and killed at least 9 women, another 10 women, and burgled more than 20 homes. He also shot and killed at least 20 people in total during his spree as a serial killer. He had a wide variety of weapons, including handguns, various types of knives, a machete, a tire iron, and a claw hammer. He punched, pistol whipped, and strangled many of his victims, both with his hands and, in one instant, a ligature. Stomped at least one victim to death in her sleep, and tortured another by shocking her with a live electrical cord. Ramirez was soon identified after he attempted a burglary. After a cast of Ramirez's footprint and fingerprint were obtained from a stolen Toyota, his mugshot was released to the public. On August 30th, 1985, Ramirez took a bus to Tucson, Arizona to visit his brother, unaware he had become the lead story in virtually every major newspaper and television news program across California. When he eventually realized that he was wanted, he tried to steal a car and escape. However, he was caught, severely beaten, and restrained till police came and took him away.
Found the offenses of murder to be first degree. The jury having returned findings of the special circumstances alleged in the information under California Penal Code Section 190.2.
He was charged with 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. On November 7, 1989, he was sentenced to death in the gas chamber. In court, he seemed remorseless, playful even.
In counts 2, 5, 8, 9, 11, 13, 20, 24.
As he was being led away, he said something bizarre. He said, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." The trial cost $1.8 million, which at the time made it the most expensive murder trial in the history of California. While Ramirez was awaiting trial, he somehow gained fans who started writing him letters and paying visits. He also got married in 1996. He appealed his death sentence in 2006 and 2007, but they were rejected. In 2009, evidence revealed that he was responsible for the murder of his first victim. This information had initially been unknown. Ramirez would not be executed because he died on June 7, 2013, after suffering from B-cell lymphoma. His body was cremated.
A recipe: poverty, drugs, child abuse. These things, contribute to a person's frustration.
In a rare interview, he talked about how serial killers came to be, but refused to talk about his crimes. Next, we turn to the chilling case of Timothy Joseph McGee, a man whose brutal acts of violence left a city in fear.
Gang leader described by police as a thrill killer is headed for death row at San Quentin.
Timothy Joseph McGee, born on April 27, 1973, is a notorious gang member from Los Angeles, California, known for his chilling reign of violence. As a member of the Tunerville Rifa 13 gang, McGee was responsible for at least 12 murders between 1997 and 2001, and convicted for 3 of them. His crimes, described as ruthless and calculated, earned him a place among California's wildest killers in history. McGee's criminal history began in the 1990s when he targeted rivals, law enforcement, and even innocent bystanders to maintain his gang's dominance in the substance trade. In the early morning of November 9, 2001, Timothy McGee and Eduardo Limpy Rodriguez drove through Atwater Village, looking for revenge after a friend's death. They saw Dwayne Natividad's SUV and attacked without warning, firing many shots. Natividad survived, but his girlfriend, Marjorie Mendoza, was killed. In July 2000, McGee was said to have planned a dangerous ambush on LAPD officers during a car chase, using police radios and working with his gang. Between 1994 and 2000, McGee alternated between incarceration and parole. During his parole periods, he killed 3 people, shot 2 LAPD officers, and attempted several other murders. After his arrest in 2003 for multiple homicides, McGee faced charges that outlined the terror he brought to Atwater Village. McGee's trial began on September 27, 2007. In court, prosecutors painted McGee as a thrill killer who acted with cold-blooded precision. Evidence included incriminating hip-hop lyrics where he compared himself to infamous figures like Freddy Krueger and Jesse James. Despite the fear McGee inspired, witnesses, including former gang members and accomplices, testified against him, though many changed their stories under pressure. The jury deliberated for a week and found McGee guilty of 3 murders and 4 attempted murders, though he was acquitted in 2 attempted murder cases due to unreliable witness testimonies.
He continued, "McGee is a committed killer and an obvious danger to society. McGee showed no emotion. McGee now resides on death row in San Quentin State Prison."
In October 2007, McGee was eligible for the death penalty due to multiple murder convictions and his role in advancing gang activities. After deliberations, a jury deadlocked on his sentence, leading to a retrial. By August 2008, a second jury unanimously sentenced McGee to death. In addition to the death sentence, McGee received multiple life sentences for attempted murders and his involvement in a violent 2005 prison riot. However, California's 2019 moratorium on executions means McGee currently serves life without parole. His cold demeanor, lack of remorse, smiling and laughing face during trial highlighted the depths of his ruthlessness. The trial's outcome brought some measure of justice, though the scars of his actions remain. Next, we turn to the unsettling case of Michael Brady, whose brutal actions left a lasting impact.
An attempted escape that has led to a very serious incident there at the Pasquotank Correctional Institute in Elizabeth City. Fire set in the prison sewing plant and several employees injured.
Michael Brady was already behind bars, but on October 12, 2017, his actions would turn a North Carolina prison into the scene of an unthinkable bloodbath. In what was meant to be a secure environment, the Pasquotank Correctional Institution became the setting for a deadly escape attempt that left 4 prison workers brutally murdered. Brady, along with 3 other inmates, meticulously planned their escape, turning everyday prison tools into weapons of destruction. Their target was the sewing plant, a part of the facility where they had access to scissors and hammers. Under the guise of working, the inmates ambushed unsuspecting staff, overpowering and attacking them with cold precision. Among the victims were Veronica Darden, a corrections officer and training specialist, and Justin Smith, a guard dedicated to keeping order. 2 civilian employees, Wendy Shannon and Jeffrey Howe, were also viciously attacked, their lives brutally ended by inmates they trusted to follow the rules.
It shows some of the inmates starting fires and attacking corrections officers. Today, prosecutors will have crime scene investigators on the stand talking about the scene and the items they processed.
The attempted breakout was as chaotic as it was violent. Using the tools from the sewing plant, Brady and his co-conspirators assaulted anyone in their path, leaving a trail of devastation. Alarms blared across the facility, but the violence escalated. Their plan involved stealing a truck from inside the prison grounds to smash through the gates. However, the sheer number of staff who intervened managed to prevent their escape. Though the inmates were recaptured within the prison walls, the damage had already been done. Bloodied uniforms and the destruction left in the sewing plant painted a grim picture of their brutality. Witness testimonies revealed that Brady played a leading role, showing no hesitation in his violent actions.
They stashed hammers and scissors that would be used to kill 4 prison employees and injure several others. The evidence against Brady was overwhelming.
Michael Brady faced the consequences of his actions in a high-profile trial that captivated public attention. Prosecutors described him as a man with no regard for human life, driven by his own selfish desires. Despite his defense team's attempts to argue for a life sentence, citing systemic issues within the prison system, the jury was unmoved. Brady was sentenced to death for his role in the killings, a rare punishment in North Carolina, but one that the victims' families felt was deserved. The sentencing brought some semblance of justice, but it couldn't bring back the lives lost in the attack.
When I went to open her airway, my fingers literally went into her.
In the courtroom, the victims' families sat together, united in grief. Heart-wrenching impact statements described the lives lost, Veronica's dedication to her job, Justin's dreams of advancing his career, and the light Wendy and Jeffrey brought to those around them. Family members also held a vigil honoring the lives lost that day. Brady, however, showed no remorse during the trial. He sat emotionless, his cold stare unnerving those in attendance. Even as his death sentence was read aloud, he maintained the same icy demeanor, a chilling reflection of the man responsible for so much pain.
My mama did everything she could to help you, and then you just do this to her? No, I can't kill them because I don't want to be in jail.
For the families, his lack of remorse was a bitter reminder of the tragedy they endured. These shocking courtroom reactions serve as a stark reminder that, while justice is necessary, it cannot fully heal the wounds left behind. No sentence can ever undo the devastation caused. However, there's still more to uncover. In our next video on screen, we dig deeper into the most chilling crimes and the relentless pursuit of justice in some of the most gripping cases ever recorded.